yet again, here's another beauty of service design is that instead of thinking about features or different aspects of the experience, we have to think about the entire experience because that's how the customer experiences it, right? They don't go onto the app and stay there for the rest of their lives. They go to the app, they go in branch, they go online, and sometimes they move in between these quite seamlessly. And we have to create a way to facilitate and enable that.
Hello guys, welcome back to another episode. Today we are speaking to Frank Ogagba. Now Frank and I met a couple of years ago at one of the big financial corporates in Sandton City. And it was a very brief meeting. I think I was there for a quick job interview. Frank was working there on the team and I think he was supposed to sell me the job, but he failed.
That's a bit of a trend of mine.
We didn't end up working together, but I kind of knew that I had to keep an eye on this individual. And I'm really glad I did so because he stuck around and he stayed there for Essentia. He worked for Fjord when Fjord bought Essentia, of course. And then he relocated to the coast to go work for one of the very renowned startups or now scale-ups here in South Africa, Ikhokha, a fintech. And we're going to be chatting all things design today. And he especially has moved from a UX capability over to service design, which is going to be interesting, a little bit more business talk. And I'm really excited for this conversation. But Frank, welcome on the show.
Thanks, Steph. Thanks, Alfie. Nice to be here. This is definitely my happy place. I've mentioned to Steph, it's really great having conversations with people about design. I'm so keen to get into it.
Amazing.
That's amazing. I'm pretty keen for this chat as well because actually at work I've been having discussions with some of the people there, and there's been hints a little bit about me possibly transitioning to service design, and I'm like, do I really know what that means? Like I know on paper, but what does that mean for my day to day? So I'll be trying to get some of the down low from you.
Oh, definitely. I've had to explain it a couple of times, especially at Ikhokha now as we are scaling the teams. There's such a big need to differentiate between product and service design because there are certainly a lot of similarities and there is overlap here and there. So these are the types of conversations I've been having. If I may get into it already, I think some of the things I notice are the key differences are that service design is more about solving customer or user problems across multiple touch points and channels, both physical and digital, with a consideration for what the customer sees as well as what happens behind the scenes to make that customer experience possible. So in my mind, there are different sort of tiers to human-centered or creative problem solving. And I think service design is more about looking at it across different channels, across different touch points. And I think that's the main difference, to be honest. And in my mind, the transition shouldn't be too difficult because you are employing the same design philosophies, processes, and methods, just to a different set of problems, if you may.
That's amazing. And I want to go. There's sort of two areas of discussion that I'd like us to eventually get to, and that what service, and you've touched on it a little bit, and that's what a service designer does, like actually their actions and the change that they'd like to impact, but then also what it means to be a service designer in terms of the work that you do, because I assume that your day-to-day activities sort of change a little bit when you actually step into the service design role. But before we get there, let's maybe chat a little bit about how you got to where you are today. You know, I mean, one of the things that this podcast has really taught me is that each person's journey to where they are today is absolutely different, even if they're in a similar position right now.
Oh, definitely.
So tell us a little bit about the backstory, the whole superhero origin story. Like, where did you start out?
Interesting that you mentioned this concept of story, because I think that's essentially where I started off, storytelling. In my sort of primary high school career, I was always drawn to this idea of using a visual and illustration and art to tell stories and create these worlds. Sometimes that existed in my head alone, and maybe sometimes that didn't resonate, and other times that connect. And I sort of had to make this decision around, what do I want to sort of build as a career in my life, and what are my key strengths? I think at that point I was already inundated with this idea that you should follow your passions, do what you enjoy doing. And for me, that was telling stories through illustration and through art. But I quickly learned that there's this story floating around that artists don't make a lot of money. And I apparently that was one of my highest priorities at the time. So I looked into careers. I looked into careers where I could make money and still be an artist. And the one that came up quite often was architect. I tried pursuing that. I went and I did a course essentially at Inkscape Design College, and I think they were based in Rosebank at the time. I think they have a couple of campuses. I loathed it. I hated it. It was just a bit too rigid, a bit too procedural, and I think in the world of physics and mathematics, you are bound by what is physically actually possible. And
of course,
I generally don't do well with numbers, so it was a really tough one for me. Yeah.
Welcome to the club.
So
The type of club.
Exactly. I had to make a pivot at the time, and this one particular degree came up. I don't know how I saw it, but it was multimedia design at the University of Johannesburg. What that presented to me was the opportunity to get back to that storytelling in a world where I can tell stories not bound by the laws of physics and mathematics, and just do what I want, be as creative as possible. So as I went and did that, I got into that actually wanting to do video. I thought I would come out on the other end of the university machine as some sort of a videographer, director, animator, something of that sort. Got into that, and this was the aha moment. This is the, what do you call it in the hero's journey? This was the aha moment.
The call to adventure.
The tipping point.
Exactly, the tipping point. I hear one of the concepts from this hero's journey around I think they call it, is the sage or the guide. For me, that was a lecturer at UJ called Terence Finn. He is kind of now. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of like.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's the second time a guest has mentioned that name on this podcast.
Yeah.
We need to figure out who this guy is.
Wasn't
Clearly
it also our
influential.
service design chat? who
Yes,
mentioned
Chanel.
it? Yes.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Great. So Terence Finn clearly is producing a lot of service designers and design thinkers.
Exactly.
That was a tipping point for me. I remember getting into this module. It was around design thinking and human-centered design, and then for the first time, I saw storytelling become a method for problem solving. And that was amazing for me. For me, storytelling is about illustrating, bringing to life ideas and concepts that don't exist yet in the world. It's about mapping, it's about idealizing, painting pictures. And in human-centered design and design thinking, a lot of it centers around how might we illustrate or bring to life what the insights are? How might we bring to life what the current experience is? What is the story of our users? What story is a customer going through, and what are the pain points within that story? And then taking that method and using creative methodologies to essentially ideate on new stories and new experiences and new solutions. And for me, that was such a humongous light bulb moment. And I fell in love. I thought to myself, this is actually what I want to do with my life. What happened after that was that we had to specialize either video or design thinking, or what do we call it? Interaction design at the time. We called it interaction design, and it was a no-brainer for me. I went for interaction design, and that's where it began. That's where my career began. After that, it was just a matter of finding the right businesses to work in, doing UX and doing more of it. And from there, I think there's another sort of pivotal point in my story. Got into a business called Big Brave. Did a little bit of front-end dev. It was a small design house, so you kind of had to do everything, design and dev.
Yeah.
Felt an urge to do more UX design, being the thing that I fell in love with. Went to free thinking, where I had the opportunity to do more of that. And I think something clicked for me in that space. I really recognized that we were solving problems, yes. As a UX designer, I was solving user pain points within interactive interfaces, right? But I realized there was like a step up in the level of decision making. It was clear to me that there were people, I didn't know who these people were, that were making decisions around what we should be building, right? So here I am, I'm working on an app. I am designing the flows, I am alleviating friction points, but why are we making an app instead of a web portal? Those are the types of questions I was asking myself. I felt that some processes could be fixed with simple changes to physical experiences, and I didn't know who was in charge of making those decisions. And that's when I sort of discovered service design through Accenture, and it began there. Yeah.
So it's hilarious at what you're saying, because I feel like I went through the exact same thing, and that's what eventually led to me leaving free thinking at ABSA. It's almost like the level of resolution that you actually have impact sometimes is already too far down to solve the real problem.
Exactly.
It's like you need to swim up the stream to actually resolve the problem at hand. But there's something that I want to roll back to a little bit that you mentioned, and that was when you're talking about how storytelling allowed you to almost illustrate a problem and then sort of ideate on a possible solution through the storytelling. And I think that's something that's so important, because in some sense, that's almost what separates humans from all other animals.
Brilliant.
Essentially, we've got this ability to like imagine a world, make it as realistic as our imagination can possibly do, and then sort of play out different outcomes until one of them actually, according to our imagination, makes some sort of sense. Brilliant. And then we sort of try to act that out in real life. And that's sort of the one thing that I think, the majority of animals, I think chimps are the closest ones to that are actually able to sort of replicate that sort of process. But I think that's something that's so important, because again, stories is one of the things that has been so consistent across human history. Like from the earliest stages, before we had like proper functional languages, we still had the cave drawings, and we had like sort of very rudimentary means of communication, but the format was always stories. And it started out as drawn, then it got into spoken stories, and then we got into writing, and then we eventually have gotten into technology and all of these other amazing things. But at the end of the day, like the fundamental unit of the communication has always been stories. And I think that's one of the things that really speaks to creative people.
Yeah, definitely.
And I want to actually also touch on that Alfie and Frank. Frank also said using story to solve a problem. And I thought that was quite an interesting way of putting it, because usually when we think about storytelling, it's either to illustrate the story of a solution we already have, the idea of, to obviously communicate that to whoever the audience is, or it's to tell a story about the past. But generally, story is not referred to when we think about story can help us frame a problem and be a tool to find the solution. And I find that so interesting that you said that.
Yeah, definitely. I think these are all very brilliant points, and I'm just speaking to some of the points that have been raised. One of the books I've read that I think have been most influential in shaping my thinking was this book called *Sapiens*. I'm actually looking at it right now, by Yuval Noah, who's essentially a historian, and he speaks about how one of the most distinct aspects or attributes of Homo sapiens is our ability to tell stories, and the way we conceptualize worlds that don't exist in our heads, and we communicate them, and it goes viral across different cultures and societies, and we sort of create things that don't really exist in the world. So it's really amazing how storytelling is a tool for change, a tool for remodeling the world, a tool for seeing the world as it is and seeing it as it should be, and maybe even envisioning things that don't even, might not even physically be proven to exist. And then working towards these idealistic goals and visions. And then I think as a species, we do strive towards new frontiers, new spaces, new realities, and it always begins with some sort of a story of what's wrong and what should be. So it's identifying problems, creating a story around that, and also coming up with solutions and creating stories around that. So for me, I think given that framework for thinking, it really just does make sense how our industry has come to be, and some of the strengths that I think designers bring to the world of problem solving. And I think the one sobering reality is that we as designers are not the only solutionists. We work with multidisciplinary people who are bringing different perspectives to the stories that we are building. I think our unique value is in our ability to tell those stories and make those stories go viral, because we use pictures. And I'm using all these metaphors and analogies, but in my mind, a picture would be a service blueprint, for example, or a wireframe, or a storyboard. And these pictures go viral because they're easy to understand. They tell the story quite clearly. They are easy to communicate to other people. I think they have the makings of what a good story should be.
Yeah, that's so true. And one of the things that I think also is really, really amazing to sort of sit and think about is that regardless of our specific discipline, like the story is almost where all our disciplines come together, because it's the one thing that's sort of common to us. And one of the things that I think, one of the areas where I do think designers fall short a little bit is we tend to not really look to understand the stories of the other players, the other sort of solution people that we work with in multidisciplinary teams. And I remember earlier in my career, before I'd sort of worked a lot with the developers, I always used to feel like they were making my life unnecessarily difficult. It's like I'm just here trying to make this, this text have a gradient on it. And then they're like, no, that's impossible. That's going to take us 3 or 4 days. And I'm like, why? It's going to make it look so beautiful. But when you actually take the time to, sit down with a developer, talk to them about what they do, try to understand the challenges that they're trying to overcome. And you sort of engage with them at the level of the story that they experience. It sort of opens a whole new world, and then you can start to collaborate at an equal footing, and eventually the outcome from that is way better. It's much more effective, and the both of you can sort of feel like you're not fighting with each other the whole time, because I think that's like a very typical or archetypal situation between the whole
meme,
design
so to
developer
say.
relationship.
Yeah. Sadly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it does that archetypal relationship between dev design. It does persist in some ways in this sort of transition to service design. I think they're always these three pillars that tend to be true, and I think these were constructed by IDEO. The design thinking agency, this idea around in order to build some sort of an innovative solution that works, it has to consider what's desirable to a user, which tends to be our strength. It has to consider what's viable for businesses, and it also has to be something that is feasible, that can be built, right? I think that conversation between those three pillars do persist. In the space of service design, we are building these omni-channel experiences, but it's not worth the business's time if it's not going to be profitable or make the business money.
Yeah.
It's also not worthwhile if it's not, we can't build it. So there are always going to be these ideal stories that we want to tell about what the most desirable solution should be for our users. But if we can't build it, is it really worth it? And I think that one of the unique challenges is in taking these ideas, these concepts, and these solutions, and breaking them down into something that we can deliver in increments and improve the world sort of in increments. And it is a challenge because as the idealist, you're always wanting to get to that ideal situation. You always want to get to that that solution, but coming back to something that I have sort of loathed, the reality of physics and mathematics and time and effort and tech, you still have to bring it into the world, right?
Yeah.
It's just the reality. Back to reality.
Exactly.
Don't we hate that?
Yeah.
I want to touch on something that or an observation that I find quite interesting, which is all three of us have experience working in consultancy and also consulting in environments where teams are big, the stakes are big, the company itself is big, the money flowing through in and out it's big sums. And now we're all three working for scale-ups. And why I find that also interesting is, when you work for a consultancy, especially when you're consulting to a very large established brand or business, design has already proven to be impactful, and the value of design is almost already understood. I mean, we all know companies pay a lot of money to consultancies to have designers there. So the business understands where design fits in and the value of design. Where when you step into a space of either a startup or a scale up, that's a little bit different, which means us as the designers stepping into that space, our job becomes a little bit different. Because now, partially when we step into the space of a scale up or startup, a huge part of our job is also to prove and help illustrate what the value of design is in business and how it actually translates to tangible impact. And I just wanted to hear what your guys' experience have been, either of you, because I definitely feel that my job has become a lot more emotional in a very good way. Stressful, not because it's faster paced, because that you can still have at a consultancy, but stressful because there's a lot more emotional attachment that you have, because the outcome that you're trying to get is not just a good design for the customer, but it's also a little bit more invested in the internal workings of business, trying to show your impact or design's value, so to say.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant point, Steph. I mean, it's something that I'm also tackling head on in the spaces I find myself right now. And in my mind, there are sort of two distinct aspects to it. I think that there is a need for most designers to realize what their unique impact they're having in the business problem solving process is. in order to sort of differentiate, which is I think that most designers don't really struggle with usually. I think we do know that it's about desirability. It's about creating these ideal journeys and experiences and reducing friction points or solving customer needs and pain points. I think the other part is that how do you tie that back to business value, right? And how do you illustrate the impact it has on that? And I think in order to do that, you really have to have some sort of a competence around understanding those business metrics that we are trying to move, understanding the business models that you're working within. And I've seen examples of designers who have done it well and designers who have sometimes unfortunately fell short of that, where they've created these like illustrious presentations of these new experiences that totally rip apart the business model. And really, I think in the minds of most executives and managers, the question would be in that moment, how is this going to benefit the business? It sounds like a great experience, but the experiences have to be tied back to a profitable business model. So I think that understanding the metrics that we're trying to move, are we trying to increase acquisition? Are we trying to increase conversions? Do we want to increase the lifetime value of our users? What are those business metrics we're trying to move? And what is the business model? And I think that going into an organization such as a startup or scale up, it's easier to get closer to what the actual business model is. What brings this business money? What brings us revenue? And I think that that's a great starting point for a opportunity where a designer can ask themselves, how might I use my craft to solve user problems and at the same time benefit the business and to add value to the business. So I do think that there needs to be an understanding of metrics and the business model in order to do that. Definitely.
Yeah. No, I think Frank, both of you're so right. It's and I think especially when you come from a big business, it's quite a shift, because when you're in a big business, sometimes you're too far separated from the business model. Like you can't see each of the individual moving parts and sort of track the actions of the business to where the money is actually made. Like if, for example, we were both placed at ABSA. If I think about what I'm doing on a day-to-day versus how ABSA actually makes money, like it's not easy to make that connection. And then when you eventually move to a startup, you're in this mindset that the business model is too far away from me, so I'm just not going to worry about it. But actually, when you do move to a smaller business, it just requires you to take the time to even just sit down with somebody and be like, hey, like I know maybe I should have known this before I joined the company, but can you just explain to me how do we make money? Like what are the things we do to make money? And then one of the things that I found that helped me a lot is I almost conceptualize the business as a user and think about the pain points of the business. Like, one of the main pain points would be the elements that form the main costs, like the aspects that actually get in the way of customer acquisition. And you actually think about these as user needs. And then the result of those gives you the metrics with which to actually prioritize your work and determine whether improving this experience actually helps the business. Because I think that's the one thing, especially, and not to throw shade, but especially in agencies, that's the one thing that I found a lot, is that creative people in agencies don't always think about the business impact of the things that they're doing, and how simply improving an experience does not necessarily mean you're creating business value.
Yeah.
And that gap, I think, is a difference between a good designer and a person that's an asset to a business.
Definitely.
And
Alfie, I just want to add on what you said about the agencies. I think it also very much speaks to the environment that you're in. I don't want to say it's the designers that work at an agency, because I think, Alfie, you've worked at an agency. I have. Frank, I think Big Brave was at an agency. Yeah.
Yeah,
so we've all been there.
Yes.
But it's they don't enable the creatives. The model there doesn't enable creatives to try and even make that connection. It's almost intentionally distanced from that creative. So I think that's just very important to note that it's not the creative themselves. And you can change the environment, of course, but changing an environment is very difficult. It's easier to just go to another environment.
Yeah, definitely. Just to add on to that point, Steph, really good point that you're making there. And so talking about just going to another environment, it's exactly what I did. So,
Same.
yeah, you experience a problem, and I guess it's in part, when you are within that hierarchy or structure, the lower you are, and not to use that word negatively, the more difficult it is to have some sort of sustainable impact in the way things run in that process. You're almost pushing up rather than downwards. So that is a fact. I totally agree with your point, Steph. I think that. And then this is also a conversation I have with the product designers at Ikhokha. It's that product design and service design, I don't think should be in the business of essentially accomplishing or completing tasks, which I think tends to be the model in some places, is that a designer should make a screen and you become a screen factory, and then that's what you just do, or create a nice user experience. I think we should be, and I think here's the strength of our capabilities in creative, human-centered problem solving, and it's only valuable in as far as it assists the customers of a particular business, and a business cannot run without some sort of a profit. So it's almost like some sort of a feedback loop, especially in this world of capitalism, where to make the users happy, the business needs to run. In order for the business to run, the users have to be happy, and that's where you come into that feedback loop and create value. So I do think that there are systemic things, such as briefs with a task list, that make it difficult for some designers who sometimes might even have quite strong skill sets and inclinations to properly add value and problem solve. And if I have a chat with any up and coming designer that's seeking to add more value in the space, I do think that positioning yourself so that you are doing some thinking and problem solving and finding spaces or businesses where a design is not valued just as a delivery asset, but more as a strategic thinking
tool,
then you are really positioning yourself for success.
I love that, and it makes me feel extremely grateful of the company that I'm with now. And it's exactly to what you say. So the company I'm with now, GoBooney, and my manager, we work quite closely together, and we're really trying to do exactly that. Is what you said is usually what happens is we get business and the stakeholders and leadership that sit for months at end creating some type of roadmap of where the business should go, where products should be. Then 4 months down the line, roadmap is established, everyone is bought in. Now, solution for the roadmap. So you're just producing what has already been solutioned on, where we're trying really hard. And it's such a tough balance because, you have the book of work, the stuff that really needs to get out, that you need to work on, obviously. But finding time and prioritizing that design is almost the thing that helps create the roadmap, that helps make the decisions, or at least challenge the things that even before the roadmap's established, we have the things that we can take to those conversations to enable questions and stories to, okay, cool, here's the roadmap. Now that design's already thought about as well and can be used to help create that vision, not reactively, but more proactively, so to say. And that's definitely the way the environment is set up.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm also against sort of speaking to that point, coming to realize that the leadership of a business will really determine just how that business runs and the cultures and processes within it.
Yeah.
I think in my space, I've been privileged that before I joined, an ex-Accenture individual was part of the executive team, and she was sort of the champion for design thinking, and service design. And I was essentially the first design thinking hire in the business. It was sort of
Wow.
spearheaded by her, and it made it very easy to be included in those conversations, because at that executive level there was design buy-in, and in some spaces it might be more difficult, but in our space it's really such a privilege that design is part of defining the roadmap, defining what problems we are solving, identifying opportunity areas in market, in user experience, and defining that. And it sort of happens at different tiers, because you might identify this huge problem to be solved, but how you solve it is another question. What features and functionality you build out. And we're working towards becoming a little bit more efficient at that in the business. But we definitely had a great starting point with design leadership at the executive level. That has been quite a nice privilege.
Yeah. So there are a number of things that we can kind of go off on, but when we kind of first started the conversation, there were two questions that I was hoping to kind of float by, and the first was about the sort of the impact that you aim to make as a service designer, and we've sort of touched on that quite a bit. But the second was about what your actual work looks like, because we've been speaking about strategy and making pictures, but for anyone who doesn't do strategy, when people mention strategy, it's just like, oh, so like you're making presentations and talking to people, and that's sort of like the sum total of what people exactly, the sum total of what people understand. So can you tell us a little bit about like some of the core activities that you sort of do as a service designer, or as an individual looking to transition into service design? Like, what can they expect? Like, what is their responsibility? Like, what do they need to bring to the table?
Okay, cool. I'm going to take it a phase at a time, and maybe walk from the beginning and where some of those starting points are within the process. So in my space, service design is primarily the desirability pillar within the product team and the product leadership team, and the product leadership team reports to executive. I work quite closely with a product manager who is essentially the viability pillar within that team. And we work closely with the chief technology officer, who's essentially playing the role of an architect who plays the feasibility. Can we actually build it? What actually makes sense from a scalability perspective? And we sort of have this ongoing conversation around what do our users want? What's the best experiences? What's good for business? And as we go through the financial year, the way in which I contribute to this conversation is starting with there are I think in my mind two to three ways that we are given some sort of a strategic direction. I think one is the something is burning input point, which is we are seeing a drastic drop off, or we are struggling to retain our users, or our acquisition has gone down, and that essentially becomes an alarm bell that prompts some sort of problem solving. We have to solve that problem. How do we solve the problem? And that kicks off the process. That's one aspect. Another aspect is more sort of opportunity identifying and very large scale strategic directions from the business. And that's just the beauty of business leadership, is that their mandate is to foresee what the industry looks like, or what they want Ikhokha to be in the industry, and give us some sort of a direction around where we should be heading, some sort of a strategic direction. How and what we do, I think a lot of it is defined in that creative, human-centered problem solving, and and within the tech space, they have their methods. Within the product management space, they have their methods, and it's an ongoing conversation. So I'll say problem or pain points, something is burning, and also opportunity areas. And my role within that is to use design thinking to facilitate how might we solve that problem. So I framing that challenge, and then doing some form of observation or research to understand why that problem exists. So a lot of the data will tell us what's going on. A lot of the times, execs will tell us what we should be doing, or a list of the potential opportunities, and understanding why, who, how is what the qualitative and sometimes even quantitative research will allow us to do. So that's part of my role within that process. And I do not work alone. I do have currently a research analyst that does a lot of the really the heavy lifting, and she's such a brilliant person at what she does to do that understanding. And we move through the various phases of the design thinking process. I think the key difference in my space as a service designer is that a lot of the outputs of this insights, ideation, and validation will be very, very high level. So we might identify that there's an opportunity in a specific solution or solution concept, such as we need a way to give our customers some sort of insights into how their business is doing, and compare that to what's happening in industry, for example. That's very high level. How it works, what functionality needs to live within that, that's still I'm not defined, but we have identified a problem area, or we have identified an opportunity within market, and we are coming up with ideas to solve it. In most cases, if it warrants, we might need to go into some sort of a service blueprinting to understand what needs to happen from an organizational, operational level to enable that type of an experience for our users. So we will service blueprint and come up with a customer journey, take a look at what happens backstage to enable that, what data and metrics do we need to be tracking against that new and improved user experience. And sometimes it does lead to a little bit of a change in operational models that enable that. Sometimes it leads to a change in the architectural processes and structures, and working quite closely with the architect to define what that should be. But that's the level at which we define our solutions. And a lot of times that leads to a year's worth or 2 years worth of solutions to build within the product teams. And the product designers sort of take over from there, taking those service blueprints and turning those into tangible solutions for our users and customers. So it's a very tiered approach. It starts with some sort of fire burning opportunity being seen, and then sort of distills into a solution that the product teams then begin to detail and build.
Yeah,
amazing.
I think that's quite interesting. Alfie and I have also spoken about our roles as designers more in the UX space, where we often have to zoom in and zoom out, if I have to put it shortly or in short terms, where it sounds like to me, but correct me if I'm wrong, now that you've stepped into service design a few years back, and also especially because you're now more at a senior level, more at a management level, you have to zoom out even a lot more. Do you still have to get down to the ground and zoom back in, or is it more just a zoomed out, higher level, day-to-day job at the moment?
Oh, definitely a lot of zooming in. And I think that just going back to analogy of storytelling, one might come up with a high level breakdown of the chapters, and then in mind have something that story is solving, a type of narrative that story should tell. When it gets passed on to those who are sort of going to detail each page, I think there's a need for ensuring that whatever we are creating is true to the problems we have identified, right? So there's a lot of liaising between myself and the various teams. Also, you guys are very familiar with this. Within a lot of product teams, you have different pods or different squads, depending on the type of makeup, that deliver on different aspects of the experience. I think, yet again, here's another beauty of service design, is that instead of thinking about features or different aspects of the experience, we have to think about the entire experience, because that's how the customer experiences it, right? They don't go onto the app and stay there for the rest of their lives. They go to the app, they go in branch, they go online, and sometimes they move in between these quite seamlessly, and we have to create a way to facilitate and enable that. And I think part of the zooming in is coordinating that all of these tie together quite well. It is ensuring that the problems that we have identified are actually being solved, and those insights are carrying through quite well. I think another part in my space is that because I have a lot of product design experience, there's a lot of mentorship and facilitation that happens around what are the best methods to use, how best can we extract value from our users and deliver on things that are valuable to them. So there is definitely a lot of zooming in that happens in my space. You know?
Okay, cool.
That's amazing. So I actually have a question on that last point that you sort of mentioned about sort of using some of your past experience as a product designer in terms of mentorship. So, I mean, mentorship is a topic or a subject that I sort of spend a lot of time in, you know, both in the context of design and outside of the context of design. But what I wanted to ask a little bit from your perspective is, like, do you, firstly, at the moment, do you have like a specific mentor? Because one of the things that I think quite a little bit about right now is once you start to step into like a mid to senior level, the amount of people who are more experienced than you in your field decreases, like that you work with directly. And, you know, eventually it gets to a point where you're the most senior person in your discipline. But I'd assume that you still need some sort of like mentorship or some sort of guidance, be it around career, be it about how to solve specific problems. So do you at the moment have any sort of either a mentor within the business or outside of the business? What does that actually look like for you?
Yeah, definitely within the business, I do have mentorship and a mentorship circle. I think that the shape that it has taken now, it has moved more away from design mentorship, which I had a lot of back at Accenture, into the space where I think that within the startup, we are presented with a very tangible problems in the industry. And just to elaborate on that, in the consulting space, what I found was that we created a lot of idealistic ideas, and we did not really get a lot of especially in more strategic roles in consultancy, to deliver it to customer, see the impact. And also there's an abstraction that comes with not being part of the organization you're solving a problem for. You can literally go there, create this great thing, and then leave, and it's up to whatever business you've entered into to deliver it. And I think that a lot of the areas in which I've had to upskill, learn, and grow has been in really, really, really building stuff and really, really hearing from the customers and having to live with the decisions you made, right? And iterate and improve on it. So
Yeah.
it's fascinating. We're dealing with business owners who really depend on our business for their essential, their salaries, the monies that they use to live. And when that is withheld for some reason or not, it really has an impact on them. So you are a little bit more closer to human impact, and that brings with it a lot of challenges. You're also close to a business that is striving and wanting to grow and extremely competitive in the space, and that brings with it a new set of unknowns. And I think that I've been privileged enough within the business to have mentorship from people who have been doing it for a while. And I think that the unique thing I'm learning is how we marrying design to the growth of a business, to a sustainable business, to sustainable operations. I can no longer toss the hot potato and skip.
Yeah.
You know, I have to stick around and see it through.
Yeah.
So It's
Yeah.
amazing
Amazing.
space.
All right. Well, I think the only thing I hate about this conversation is that unfortunately we are on a clock. We all three live in a beautiful country, but apart from managing the three of our calendars, we are also managing the schedule of load shedding.
Yeah.
So I think this makes it a good place to maybe just close and say, this was so great, Frank. I think we'll definitely chat to you again in the future. It's really hard to stop here, but yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, guys. It was such a great opportunity to chat with you. This week, I did some tallying on what the things I enjoy versus things I don't enjoy, just to sort of optimize my happiness. And one of that is just having conversations about design with people who are in the space. So I'm really appreciated, guys. Had so much fun and look forward to doing it again.
Yeah. Definitely.
Definitely.
To close, can you maybe give the listeners an idea of where they can find you if they want to reach out to you and continue this conversation or just talk to you about other stuff?
Okay, there's only one platform you can find me on, and that's LinkedIn. I am not a big social media person anymore, so just DM me on LinkedIn and let's continue the conversation. Always available there.
Amazing.
Amazing.
There you guys have it.
Cool.
And thanks for listening.
Frank, I just want to say thanks for chatting, and I'm definitely personally going to be reaching out to you. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I kind of get why people at Free Thinking sort of thought we might be somehow related or connected in some kind of way. I think
it finally makes sense. Yeah, definitely.
But thanks for your time.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
And that's a wrap.